If your team is still dialing for dollars, you are already behind. Joe Candido says there's a smarter way to sell now, and it starts with leadership.
First off, people aren't getting results. If you really want to drive consistent results, simple cold calling approach doesn't work. They're simply hoping that they catch somebody that happens to be in the buying cycle at the perfect time. And you will get some hits there. And I like to say even a blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while. But that's not a strategy, that's hope. And that's why I say traditional selling is dead.
Welcome back. Today's guest is Joe Candido, founder of Fifth Element Associates, and he's the author of Leadership Selling. We're going to then dive into, so how can sellers drive real results, ditching the old pitches and leading with outcomes? Welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Let's get the doom and gloomy part over with first. Traditional selling's dead. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I really believe it is. I actually think it's been dead for a long time, but people still try and do it. And the evidence of it is compelling. First off, people aren't getting results. I deal with sales leaders and CEOs, founders of companies all the time, and they bring me in because they're not satisfied with their results. And the first thing we look at is, well, what's your lead generation? And usually they're pitching, they're dialing for dollars. I mean, it's more sophisticated than, a simple tagline of dialing for dollars, but fundamentally, they're just doing high velocity calling. And not shockingly, they're not getting the results. And I look at the CEOs and I look at the salespeople and say, would you take that call? Why would you take that call? The person calling doesn't know enough about you. Mm-hmm. They're not having the right conversation with you. They're simply hoping that they catch somebody that happens to be in the buying cycle at the perfect time. And you will get some hits there, and I like to say even a blind squirrel finds an acorn once in a while. But, that's not a strategy, that's hope. And, if you really want to drive consistent results, that simple cold calling approach doesn't work. And that's why I say traditional selling is dead. Because first off, we're starting with the wrong approach. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But yeah, that's the premise. And there's a lot of data to support it.
Some folks might say, well, I do cold emailing. It's different. Or cold LinkedIning. Just basically, is cold dead?
Well, yeah, it is dead. I mean, let me not hesitate. If dead's too strong a word, dying quickly,
We can say that.
I mean, don't go down that path. It's not gonna take you to the promised land. And sure, you'll get some people to link in with you, but it doesn't mean they're gonna do business with you. I mean, a lot of people think that the more connections they have, the better. So they're gonna say yes, but it doesn't mean they're gonna do business with you. And you can send emails out. And I think, if emails are part of an overall campaign or strategy, then that's a great tool. And I think the telephone's a great tool. But it has to make sense. You have to have a reason for calling. And the reason for calling can't be buy my product. Okay. That's it in a nutshell. Like there's got to be a legitimate reason for calling. And the only people you can get through to are procurement people because they're paid to talk to you. Mm. But, is that who you really want to be selling to? Do you want to be in a RFP situation, a bid situation where you're dealing with procurement and they're just grinding you out constantly? Okay, if that's what you want, but I think you can do better.
And if you're selling to SMBs, there's no procurement person. You're trying to get the CEO on the line. So
that's exactly right. I have a small business as well. So I get calls and I love to get them because I like to hear how the salespeople are. And the first off, I hear like a delay. I'm like, okay, this is a call center, right? They got an automated dialer and there's a delay. And then someone gets the phone and they're literally shocked that there's a human being answering the phone. So now they're caught off guard because they don't expect anybody to answer. And, I start to smile because I know what's coming next. The next question is, are you the owner? And I'm like, and then I simply say, no, I'm not. And I hang up the phone, whether I am or I'm not. Like, no, I'm not going to talk to you. You know nothing about me. Nothing. There's no good reason for me to talk to you. Why would I waste my time?
Yeah. Okay. So we've touched a little bit on it. It's dying. It's dead. We all know and we felt what it's like on the buyer side of this. So what would the shift to be a leader, sell to leaders, this leadership selling concept?
Sure. So the shift, have a legitimate reason for talking to them. And if you have that, you can get through because you have a reason and it's a good reason. And so the idea is to know your customer or at least know the industry, not just your industry, but their industry, not just your product, but something going on for them. And even SMB can do this. It's not that hard to do, and then you have to put a little thought and a little research around that industry on some things that are relevant to them that link to what you do. Okay. So let's take an example. Let's say you're selling IT services and you're trying to get small businesses to work with you so that you can do their help desk and the other IT services that many small businesses desperately need. Okay. So that's your business. Now you've got to link it to their business. And you can do that based on the type of industry they're in. If there's enough players in that industry, then you can have what I would refer to as a vertical market alignment. Or you can have a horizontal alignment, which might be, hey, here's some changes that have happened in the IT space in the last year. Are you seeing any of these? Many of the CEOs I speak with are having cyber security issues and ransomware is up. Did you know it's up 40% in the last year? And they're targeting SMB. They used to target enterprise, but now they're targeting companies just like yours. Are you seeing this? Would you like me to send you some information, not a literature, but a white paper from a third party? Right? Then you can have a conversation. It's not a pitch, but it might lead to, can you solve my problem? And I'd like to have that conversation too. But I have to start with something that's relevant to them. It has to make sense to them. And when I call CEOs and I train sales forces to call CEOs, I say, you need to tell them, I'm deliberately calling you, not the IT department. And let me tell you why. There's a reason. This is important for you because you're responsible for the financial health of the business. And today, cybersecurity is bankrupting companies.
Mm.
And it's not something that you want to delegate to IT without at least being in the loop. There's some reports from Deloitte, from Gartner that will give you information and we can go over those. And then we can bring your IT people in. I'm happy to talk to them too. And this isn't a pitch. This is just to give you some valuable information. You're going to get their attention at that point.
Sounds super simple and human. I worked at a very large company doing, 80 dials a day at least. And they put us through challenger training. They spent a quarter million just on our office to put us through challenger training. Oh, was it the wolf? I don't even remember anymore. But I was like, there's so much to think about versus, oh no, well, I have to go talk to this person first versus this person first, and then work my way up to this for an SMB sale. So, how for SMB or a large company, do you just go to the leader? Is that what you're recommending?
I do. Now, in a really large enterprise, like if I want to sell to Cisco, I'm not going to call on the CEO most likely, although actually I did. But, I don't always recommend that, right? Like it might be too high. But the point is you want to go high. You want to deal with someone who's a real decision maker and you want to have a business conversation, not a product conversation. Okay. You want to talk about their business, what's going on with their business, and then see if there's alignment with what their priorities are, what their challenges are, and what you can do. Because that's a business outcome conversation, and they're empowered to do that. I always say managers are paid to run the business, leaders are paid to change the business. And the leaders have control of the budget. Their job is to change the business. I mean, whoever got a job is a big leader with a corner office. And on the first day, they say, hey, here's all the bells and whistles and the big salary. And there's only one thing that's really important. Whatever you do, don't make any changes. No, that's absurd. No one would ever say that. I'm paying you to make changes. You're a leader. Okay. So in SMB, that leader is typically the business owner, and they're going to make changes to keep that business healthy. First thing is avoid risk. Second thing is grow. Right? I mean, those are like if you really want to keep it simple. And so you should be selling to leaders because they care the most and you can have a business conversation with them. And secondly, you want to act like a leader. I'm not against sales. I love sales. I've done it my whole life. But if you come in there pitching, it's your agenda. And that doesn't work. If you're a leader and you walk through the door, you're genuinely interested in their business. And so a foundational element of leadership selling is you can't sell until you've built a relationship because trust and credibility are critical.
Hmm.
And no one's going to talk to you if they don't trust you. No one's going to talk to you if they don't think you're credible. So you got to do that first. And that's not about pitching your product. That's about connecting with them on their level, their business. If I talk to you about your business, you're like, hey, Joe gets me.
Yeah. How does in this day of AI slop and
I love that AI slop. That's beautiful.
how does this connection with leaders make a huge difference for selling?
I think actually AI slop helps make that connection for two reasons. First off, what happens is they want that human connection, right? They don't want that scripted scenario. They don't want that automated thing, whether it's, a call or an email or whatever. They want a person.
Hmm.
They want to be able to look them in the eyes. They want to be able to get them on the telephone. They want to be able to get them to respond to an email. They want to connect with a human. So that's the first thing. I think the more automated we get, the more important human interaction is. And honestly, COVID proved that, right? Like what we all learned during COVID, a lot of things we learned, but one of them is like we're social.
Oh, yeah.
We are social animals. We're a species that wants to connect with others of our kind. Okay. And so people want that. So I think that's the first thing. And secondly, AI is a tool and it can be a really good tool, a really bad tool. It's up to you to use the tool well. And I always say, like, if you have a carpenter's toolbox, but you don't know how to use those tools, you're not going to make great stuff. It's a great toolbox, but you're not going to make great stuff. But if you're a really good carpenter and I give you those really good tools, you're going to make great stuff. And so AI is a tool. Let's figure out how to use it effectively, appropriately.
A lot of sales teams are buying, like, oh, let's add this to our CRM or let's tack on this and it'll find and it'll scrape all the stuff. How can a sales org leverage AI properly so that it's not slop, but so it's allowing the folks to focus and build relationships?
So I think the first thing is you have to have a strategy in your sales organization, whatever that is, right? And so, leadership selling would say our strategy is that we're going to build relationships first. We're going to position ourselves as thought leaders and we're going to slow the selling cycle down so that we actually win more deals. I know that sounds contradictory, but the longer you spend in relationship, the more deals you close at higher margin. Okay. The quicker you get to proposal, the less likely you're going to win because you don't know enough to make a good recommendation. And even if you do, they don't trust you because they don't know you yet.
Hmm.
So this whole race to, let me quote you, which happens a lot in SMB, is counter to actually winning. Okay. So the first thing is like, let's slow it down, have a strategy, know what we're trying to accomplish, and then look to AI to assist in your gaps. So for example, one thing that many of my clients are using AI for is they're using it to accelerate their research on their customers, not to automate the connection with the customer, but to understand the customer's world. Okay. So that gathering of information, like today, it's very easy for me to get a credible third party report that ties into the value that I want to bring to somebody. And it accelerates my learning of their industry. So that's great. Okay. It's an accelerator if I use it properly. So, if an organization needs that, great. Maybe marketing is, playing that role of providing, content to support sales, and they're using AI as a tool to accelerate that. So I think that could be very helpful. For role plays, it's awesome. We can take an AI tool and build in customer scenarios and then have a role play done and then have AI critique it. And we can even do critiquing real time. And an analogy to that is a lot of times when we're using Zoom or other video conferencing tools, we get notes at the end, right? Which is very nice. You're like, hey, you have a conversation, you get your summary notes. Well, with AI and a sales call, if I'm using Zoom or one of those tools, it might make some real time suggestions. It might help me remember what the next step is or based on what the customer's saying, here's a question to ask. So I do think, especially from a training perspective, those AI tools for role playing can be great. I think for research, it's awesome. I think that there's a lot of places in the world of enablement that AI is finding itself. But I will tell you in general, I feel like enablement is bloated right now. Enablement is the tools that help salespeople, and they need those tools. But performance is actually executing in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to get better results, do both, but probably weight performance heavier. And right now we're weighting enablement heavier. And so I think that the scale is off balance. Like, yeah, you want to do both, but buying a lot more tools doesn't close more deals.
I've joined companies that had, okay, we use Slack for this, Teams for this, but then when we're in the CRM, it has Apollo and then this. And it's like, well, how do they just find the list of who they know they're going to talk to that day and then talk to them and know where they are in their conversation or where in the journey this customer is?
Chelsey, it's startling the number of hours the average salesperson spends selling per day. It's typically 20% of the day is spent selling. What are they doing the rest of the time? They're bogged down with tools that aren't actually really helping any longer. There's too many of them. It's too confusing.
I hear the argument. I've been in an industry that's pretty lagging tech wise. It's catching up. So, freight technology. So, folks would say, I don't need the CRM and still using that spreadsheet to do their sales and like resisting tools altogether. How does changing from that or I'll start fresh. Basically, if you're in a certain way of selling, whether that's dial, 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 or I use a spreadsheet, I do this, I do that. How can you get a salesperson to understand, all right, we're going to switch to this new type of selling. It's going to slow it down and it's going to be uncomfortable, but you're actually going to be selling more.
I mean, that's a great question. We're change resistant as a species, and I'm not sure why, but I am too, right? So I don't want to sound like I'm better than anybody else. The reality is we change our whole life. The only evidence of life is change. And the greatest things that happen to us are the result of some change, but at the same time, we resist it. So that's just the interesting thing about being a person, being a human. So the way I see change most effective is we start with leadership. We build a solid strategy. We incorporate the team in the creation of that strategy. So it's not being jammed down their throat, but they're a co creator of it. Okay. So that takes some time to build all of that and put it in place. And then we do training and coaching is really key. The other thing that's really important is competencies, because competencies address behavior. And there's a huge difference between skill and behavior. I might know how to do something, but I might not want to. I might not like it. I might have an attitude or a belief or a perception that gets in the way of that. And so I start with competencies with my clients so that we can really figure out what are the ideal competencies to do this job and do it well. And then let's figure out where everybody's at. And then we can build individual programs. And a lot of that is self development of competencies that I want to improve upon, and we hire to those competencies. So hopefully when we hire, we're getting new people coming in that are going to be receptive to whatever it is we're doing. And the bottom line is most people will change. It's a culture, right? Once you get that culture going, people adapt to it. Culture's fascinating because if it doesn't fit, you'll have to leave. It gets so uncomfortable that you just can't stay. And that's okay because you want your culture to be protected and to be your brand and your values. So some people won't make the change, they won't do it, but for the most part they will. They just need to be brought along and shown it, and if they're a co-creator in it, it really accelerates the adoption. They put their energy then into not whether I choose it or not, but yes, I choose it, and now I'm going to put my energy into learning it. But initially, there's a whole thing in their mind about whether they even want to learn it. So they won't start learning until they reach that decision. Yes, I will.
If we're only spending 20% of our day selling, let's spend like at least 20% of it learning how to sell better.
Yeah, why not? Right? I mean, if you look at professional athletes, they spend most of their time practice and very little time, performing for pay. Right?
Mhm.
I mean, Michael Phelps spent 6 to 8 hours in the pool 7 days a week for 4 years to then do a 2 minute swim at the Olympics. Okay, the ratio is unbelievable. And they're the best of the best, and they practice all the time. So why do we think we don't need to practice? Why do we think we don't need to learn? I just don't get that. And when I look at top performing salespeople, they're curious and they're lifelong learners. They're open to change. I've got this really nice visual that doesn't work in a conversation like this, but basically what it says is that the consistent performers change before they have a problem. They change before they need to. Even though they've got a winning formula, they make change. The average performers hang on to the winning formula until it augers into the ground, and then they kind of start to figure out, I guess I need to do something new. And so they have peaks and valleys in their sales cycle, right? And their revenue and their quota. Good months, good years, bad years. The top performers are always changing.
How are the top performers creating relationships today that you're seeing?
Those relationships are real. They're not just to do business. They genuinely care about their customers and it shows and the customer can tell. They build real trust. They're not worried about making the sale. They know they're gonna because they know when they build that relationship, they can help that customer and that customer is going to buy from them. And, when they change jobs, the customers go with them. They have real relationships. I have salespeople all the time that say, oh, yeah, I've been friends with this person for 4 companies. I've known them for 15 years and we've been doing business forever. That's you earned that. Okay. You really earned that. And you know what? It's a lot more fun. It's a lot better. One of the things I say when I'm training is I want you to imagine that the company that you're trying to get into just had a change. And the change is that your best friend is now the owner of that company. What's the chances you're going to be able to get a meeting? 100%. Okay. Doesn't mean you're going to get the business. Even though you're best friends, you have to earn the business, but you're not going to get blocked. You're going to get access. Your friend is going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, what his or her challenges are, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're worried about. You're going to get the information that you need to do a great job. That's because you have a relationship. That's the power of relationship.
Sounds like if you don't care about your product or you don't care about the problem you're solving for the customer, you probably shouldn't sell that product.
That's exactly right. When we get to the proposal stage, I say all the time, listen, at the beginning, you're building a relationship. Now you're recommending.
Mhm.
And if you don't believe in it, the customer's never going to believe in it. You need to look them right in the eye and say, you should absolutely buy this from me because I understand your business. It's going to work and it's going to achieve your goals. Let me remind you of what this is going to do. You'd be nuts not to do it. The sooner the better because you're either going to save money, mitigate a risk, or grow your business. You know, why would you want to wait? Like you have to believe in it. And if you don't believe in it, then you're not ready to propose it to the customer. Go back to the drawing board, figure it out. But when you got it figured out, it's easy to sell because you believe in it and you really know their business and you really know what's going to work for them and they trust you.
I've had salespeople tell me no, and I've told people, "You don't need this," and they're like, "Whoa." It's like, "No, what you have is great. Call me when you this is when you're gonna need us. Call us then." And then I'm like, "Oh gosh," when I get like the Riverside, this company that we're doing the podcast on, said, "You don't need to upgrade yet. You're too little. But, you know, call us in a year." I said, "Okay, I will. I won't
And they
switch
will.
systems."
And they will. They will, like they'll remember that.
Mhm.
And the reason why salespeople don't do that, in my opinion, there's two primary reasons. One is they're not having the right conversation to really understand what the customer needs. Okay.
Mhm.
That's really bad because you can't make good recommendations if you don't understand them. But here's the other one. They don't have a good enough pipeline. Okay. And so therefore they're trying to sell anything they can. Exactly. They're like, oh, what am I going to do? And, then you make bad deals you really regret. So if you've got a good pipeline, you can look someone square in the eye and say, you know what, I'm not the right person for you, or the timing's not right, or that we're going to have to pivot. Because you're going to do what's best for them, and you're not worried about the fallout that you're going to experience because you've got other deals that are going to close.
You touched on this a little bit, this relationship. What's give to get?
Give to get is that beginning of the relationship where instead of going into the customer and saying, tell me about your business, the Spanish Inquisition, let me ask you a bunch of questions, pain questions, which is typical selling, right? Consultative selling, honestly, is really just asking a bunch of questions that are designed to make the customer buy your product.
Mhm.
It's not really a proper discovery. Okay. So starting with that is flawed for a few reasons. One, they're not going to invest the time with somebody unless they believe that's worth it, right? I won't invest time with somebody. Nobody will if you don't think it's worth it. So you have to build the relationship first. So give to get says instead of asking a bunch of questions or pitching, why don't you give them something? You know, give them some insights, give them some information, give them some best practices, tell them what their competitors are doing, talk about a trend, give them a report, like share some information that's actually meaningful to them. And when you do that, you'll get something back. Okay. When you do that, you'll start to build a relationship. And that's often where email, by the way, can be part of an effective campaign. A well thought out cold calling campaign might be I'm going to send a couple of things and then I'm going to do some follow up. And none of it is product, it's information that's relevant to their business. It's a compelling event, it's some newsworthy information that starts to warm them up. I post on LinkedIn to do the same thing to establish I'm sharing information that might be helpful to my customers. Now I've got a little strategy going. Now, when I call, I can reference that information. Even if they haven't seen it, I can reference it and talk about it and say, well, let me send it to you again. So I'm giving it the beginning. Maybe I'm giving them an introduction to somebody else. Oh, based on what you're telling me, you should let me introduce you to my friend Chelsey. She's really great and she'll be able to help you out, right? When you do that at the beginning, they get to know you, they start to trust you, and then they'll give to you information so you can do business.
More selfless at the beginning.
Absolutely. Are you there for yourself or are you there for them? Who are you really there for?
Yeah. When I've had the most success in sales is when I had this abundance mindset where I'm like, our product's awesome. They're going to need it. They're going to come to us. The pipeline's fine. I'm just going to show them how, the problem that they have and help them solve it without this desperate gimme, gimme, gimme. That's when
Exactly.
our teams were ripping, but it's hard to stay in that consistently. So, how do you keep a team as you're rolling this out with a new company? How do you keep them along and say, trust me, this is going to work. Trust me, this is going to work?
Yeah, that's a hard part because there's day to day and month to month and quarter to quarter pressures, right? And so part of it is to set expectations that are realistic. Here's what the first quarter looks like. Probably not a lot of change. If anything, if you're in trouble, we're probably going to continue to be in trouble, because this takes some time. when I look at a pipeline, I want some of it to be strategic, very proactive, targeting customers, building relationships. And I know some of it's going to be transactional. And that's okay. I just don't want all of it to be transactional. Okay. And there's some inbound, right? Almost every business has got some level of repeat business or natural flow of inbound. So that should continue as is. And I'm not gonna play around with that at the beginning. I want to really focus on the outbound of driving net new revenue, net new customers. And then you start to build momentum because you're going to get referrals, you're going to get repeat business. You'll start to see your pipeline ratio change. It'll change from like 90% transactional to 50% transactional. Well, what's the other? The other's more strategic. And after a while, your margin goes up because now you're doing better deals. But you have to kind of map it out for the client and show them, this is a journey. It's going to take 3 months, 6 months, however long it's going to take. These are the indicators that we're going to see over time, but not immediately. And you have to make sure they don't talk out of two corners of their mouth. Hey, we're really strategic. Close it right now. Go give everybody a discount because it's the end of the month, right? You have to help them hold the course. I find that training and coaching with leadership is just as important as with team members.
It's a great segue into what is a sales leader's role in this transformation for their sales team.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot in my book because I really wrote the book more for sales leaders than individuals. It's not so much a how-to book, but it's more about a strategy. There is some how-to in it, of course. So I'll use the word strategy again. I mean, the first thing we've got to do is build that plan and make sure that they're in agreement with it. And then show them, here's where we are in the plan. Here's your role right now. Let's talk about what that looks like. Let's talk about how that's different from the way we used to do it. And if you build that plan and they're on board with the plan, then that coaching goes pretty smoothly because, they're on board and now they just want to learn the most efficient way to execute it. And then they'll start calling you in for conversations like, hey, I know we're on the plan and I know this is what we're supposed to do, but I've got this unusual situation. What do you think I should do? And that's great because now they're pausing, stopping, and they're like saying, instead of just do the normal thing I've always done, I'm going to take a step back and try and figure out what's the right move here. And that's great, and then we figure out what the move is and they learn from that. And before you know it, they've got it. And I remind them also they're like setting the example for the whole team. If they can't walk the talk, don't expect the team to do it.
If you said earlier, talk out of both sides of the mouth. So if we're trying to transform the way we sell and then it's the end of the quarter and you say, shit, the CEO is looking at me. If our team doesn't hit it, I'm gone. The pressure can be immense during this transition period. How can senior leadership help the sales leaders stick to it and not do the get the numbers?
So there's two scenarios really. The first scenario is things aren't going well and we're making change because like we're really, we're too late to make the change. So now we're really feeling it. So then you have to have like the senior leadership understanding that we are not going to turn this thing around in a month or two. This is the reality. And they have to have the ability to ride that. But what we can do is show them where we're at. So we can say, hey, here's the journey, right? Try and get my hands in the window here. Here's the journey. We're right here. Now we're right here. Now we're right here. So you can show them progress, even though the revenue isn't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the first thing is you got to be able to show them where you're at, where you're trying to get to. That's part of it. And the other part of it is if these things are happening, then we've got to get out in front of them and have a conversation and tell leadership, if we change course right now, you've just derailed everything that we've done and it's going to be worse. It's not going to be better. It's going to be worse. That's the reality. So my job a lot of times is to have those conversations at the beginning before they even hire me to set some expectations on what it looks like and what we can do and what we can't do and what happens if in the middle of it they need to know that, right? It's my job to explain that to them. But generally speaking, if a company's having trouble, I won't work with just the sales team. I'll have to work with the entire leadership team because they need to know and they need to be on board. Now, if the sales team's doing well and they're just trying to get to the next level, we may not have to have as many other parties on the leadership team involved. And for SMB, a lot of times the leadership's really small and it's totally accessible and, they're all right there anyway. So it depends on how big the organization is.
One thing that you talked about earlier was enablement versus performance and how we're not focusing on the right things. What should sales leaders be focusing on?
Should I be focusing on?
Well, in terms of their team
They
performance.
should be focusing on their plan. I know it sounds like a terrible answer, but it's actually it's a great answer because a lot of them don't have a plan, and that's the problem. So they're looking around trying to figure out which they should be focused on. No, you should be focused on your plan. Like, we've built this plan, we built this strategy, we've got these measurements in place, we've got all this stuff. Like, that's what you should be focused on. Like, running that plan, making that plan work, figuring out, what changes have to be made. That being said, I think, culture, vision, values is really important. That comes from them. Okay. They have to set the tone for that organization. Who are we? What do we stand for? How do we take care of our customers? Those things really matter. And then they have to clear roadblocks, clear obstacles. That's an important role for leadership, is to clear the obstacles so the team can execute. And I think that leaders don't spend enough time in the field. So the other thing that I think is really important is get out there. Get out there with your team. Get out there and see your customers. Don't take over the conversation. See your people in action. Work with them, support them. People love a great leader. We all want to work for a great leader. And when we've got a great leader, we want to ride with them. We want them in front of a customer. Be that leader. Be that sales leader that your team is like, oh my gosh, my leader's here today. It's so great. Instead of, oh boy,
Yeah.
guess who's in town?
Yeah. So I hope I don't mess up, you know,
Right.
super scared. What would be the difference between managing or micromanaging your team and then being this leader? How can somebody move from someone who's in the muck, just like to leading a sales organization?
Well, there's some interesting cycles within a month, a quarter, a year that are more conducive to managing versus coaching or planning, right? So usually at the beginning of any cycle is when we do more strategy, more planning, more leading, and then we get more tactical with the execution. So at the end of the month, end of the quarter, yeah, we're going to roll up our sleeves and figure out, without compromising our values and our strategy, what can we close this month? So there is both, right? But management is really tactical and leading is more strategic. So I think that that's kind of a conceptual, divider for the two. So what we see for the most part is a lot of management and not a lot of leadership, not a lot of strategy. People are tactical all the time, and that doesn't really serve. There's not enough coaching going on. So when I think about a sales organization, especially a smaller organization, I think of leadership and coaching going hand in hand, and mentoring. Really developing people. Competencies are great for conversation, for mentoring. Like, let's say, for example, I'm working on negotiation or I'm working on business acumen. And now my leaders are going to spend some time with me and help me do that. Have a conversation with me, give me, an assignment. That's not working on a direct account, but it relates to all my accounts.
Mm.
Okay. And so that's more of a leadership function as well.
With AI coming in and people having more of the tedious stuff off their plates, I feel like leaders can now make the time to do this instead of filling their plate with more crap. How many hours a week are the leaders spending doing stuff like this with their team? This coaching and mentoring?
It varies quite a bit. There's a lot of great sales organizations out there, and coaching and mentoring are built right in, and it's their culture, and they're
Mhm.
really good at it. And what you get is lower turnover, better hires. It starts with better hires, okay? You get better hires, better onboarding, better results, okay? And more collaboration. And so that's really in an organization where people are growing. And as they grow, so grows the revenue. They go together. Okay. And organizations that don't have that, it's hard to adopt it because they tend to be more tactical, transactional, and it's very hard for them to get out of that mode. You usually have to bring in somebody to help them do that. But I do want to say that, I do see some really impressive organizations, and you look at, things that, as I said, like you look at the turnover, and yeah, they're churning some bad performers, but their turnover is really, it's minor. It's on their terms, not the other way around. You look at the percentage of people that are at quota, it's 80%, 85%. Typically it's 50%, by the way. So, 85%, 80, 85% is a lot. That's good. Okay. And then you look at the people that have consistently exceeded quota, like 30, 40% of our people are always above quota. That's a good culture. That doesn't just happen, by luck. That happens by really, building in the pieces. And those teams are focused on performance. Enablement is a tool to help me do my job, but I'm focused on how to execute in the field. What skills do I need to build to understand my customer's world better? What improvements can I make in my proposal? How do I negotiate? Like, it's really about out in the field executing following a strategy, not just the tools.
You talked about how the traditional way of selling is dead and the buyers don't want it. They don't want to get these cold calls. How is this leadership selling, new approach to selling, better for the customer in the long term after they become your customer?
So there's 4 stages to leadership selling. I'll hit them really quickly. And by the way, it can overlay into another methodology. It's very complementary. The first one is the engage stage, and that's about relationship, credibility, trust. The second stage is explore, and that's about doing a real discovery, like really understanding their business. And oh, by the way, it's not hard, but when you do that well, not only do you know what they need, and not only do you build more trust by that process, but you can give them an ROI value proposition. When you get to recommendation, you can say, you told me during the discovery A, B, and C, and you told me the cost of A, B, and C, and I'm going to deliver on that with the solution. And you're going to realize that revenue, or you're going to mitigate that risk, or you're going to lower that cost. So the discovery is phenomenal because you get an ROI given to you by the customer. How great is that?
Hmm.
So then that third stage is resolve. I'm going to resolve the issues. Okay. And then the last stage is post sale. And that's the support stage that says, first off, I'm going to deliver on the promise. I'm going to make sure that we do what we said we're going to do and that they're satisfied. And then I'm positioning myself for repeat business and referrals. And that's a key cycle. Customers have said in surveys over and over and over again, they want their salesperson to really understand their business. What I like about the challenger sale is it's okay to challenge your customer. It's okay to give them, some new ideas. They want that. They want the ideas coming from the outside because you have a perspective they don't have. And they're very interested in hearing that. And I think that aspect, is healthy for a relationship and it tends to create better solutions. So it's not that we don't sell. It's just that we really sell with a lot of knowledge about where the customer's at and what they need. And when we provide trends, they can be the challenge that gets the customer to consider some new things. And trends are very credible because it's not my opinion. It's literally what's going on in the marketplace. It's what their competitors are doing. Bottom line is a trend is what my competitors are doing. And I need to pay attention to it
Or get left behind quickly.
or get left behind. Exactly.
This has been a lot of fun to discuss as someone who was a cold caller for a long time.
I bet you were good at it.
I was terrified at first. I hated it, but I got pretty good over time. But still, I didn't stay friends with them. It was very transactional. It wasn't that much fun. It was just dial for dollars, really. So this is a much more fun way to sell. We're going to put your book. I now know how to put the picture of it in the podcast. So if you're
Nice.
watching, you'll be able to see it. If you're listening, we're going to put it below. If there was a founder or a business thinking about how do we change things in 2026, what's a little nugget you hope they walk away with from this episode?
I think that not knowing the particulars of a business, the first thing I would say is, take a real honest look at what you're doing today. Start there and be really honest with how do we sell today? And, how great is it or how great isn't it? Start there and really be honest about it. And I think that's the first thing to do. And then ask yourself, what changes do I think would make a difference? And hopefully I've given them some ideas on this podcast. I can tell you from all my experience, and I've worked with very large companies and small companies, 43 states and 25 countries I've done business. Relationship matters. Understanding your customer's business matters. Pitching doesn't work. Those things I can promise you. I really can't. So I think if they just take a fresh look at their business, they'll get some ideas. Certainly, I don't want to sound like I'm promoting myself, but my book's got lots of really good ideas, and it's a really cheap book in terms of, how much does it cost to buy a book and read it and get some ideas. It's a simple way to get some fresh ideas.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing everything today, and I look forward to following your journey.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really awesome.
Talk to you soon.